I think many people reject Christianity because of who they think God is. So this evening our title is Dictator. Isn't God just a taskmaster? I think it's the idea that God's like a kind of heavenly policeman, always kind of telling us what to do. He's the half slave driver, kind of God who's never pleased with us, always demanding more of us, crushing us with his commands. And so, for some of us, maybe we think, that it would just be unbearable trying to keep all these commands, a kind of miserable existence. As we think about dictators, what are they like? Well, they have draconian laws. They're not at all interested in their people. And so, many people think, well, God, he's a hard God, doesn't really care about us. And, I wonder if any of us here, maybe we're tempted to think of God a little bit like that. So if you ask people, what's it like being a Christian? Many people would assume, well, it's just about following a set of rules, mainly about what you can't do. And if you fail to keep them, well, God's going to be out to get you. So, people say, rules bring guilt, and that's something bad. We want to avoid that. Maybe people think of God a bit like a lecturer who sets an impossibly hard test, which you can never pass, and the pass mark is 100%. And then after you've failed, he just berates you for not trying hard enough. And so, people think, well, the answer is you just got to try really hard. You're going to be miserable and joyless. I suspect that, if we've got that kind of idea, it could be because as we've been growing up, we've had a kind of religious upbringing. Maybe at school, maybe having to kind of stand up, sit down, sing songs, pray this, pray that, sit up straight, don't talk. And, if that's been our experience of religion in childhood, then, frankly, why would anyone want to follow that kind of God? And if you're thinking of God like that, if you're rejecting a God like that, let me tell you outright, that's exactly what I would do. Because this is not the God who's introduced to us in the pages of the Bible. And we're looking at the Ten Commandments, which hopefully will appear behind us. And it's the most famous list of commands from the Bible. But rather than just thinking about them as a list of rules from a kind of dictator-style God, I'd like us to see them in a new way and to see what the God behind them is like. So just to set the scene, just have a glance up there at verse 2 there. It's really a vital introduction because it shows that these commands of God are given to a people who are rescued. God says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the lands of slavery. So they've been delivered from being slaves in Egypt. They were powerless to escape, but God had rescued them. And so we see that there are words from a loving God, a rescuing God, and it makes all the difference to recognize that. So just recognize right from the start that these commands are not meant to be a means of us being saved. It's not that God kind of says, if you do all of these things, then you'll be good enough for me and I'll save you. But actually, he's already done it for them. Now, when I was at school, I loved athletics, but there was one event that I was hopeless at. That was the long jump. Lousy at the long jump. But the thing about the long jump is it always ends in failure. No matter how good you are, even if you're an Olympic standard athlete, the competition ends with failure because, none of us can beat gravity. And so here the Ten Commandments aren't God raising the bar impossibly high and saying, well, you've got to clear this. So how we should think of them? Well, I want to suggest three ways in which we should view these Ten Commandments. The first one's a little bit longer, then more briefly for the last two. The first thing is, as we see them before us, is they show us what God is like. They show us what kind of God he is, what's important to him, what he cares about. Maybe you've noticed that the first four of the commandments, they speak about our attitude towards God. And then the last six, they're more about the way we treat each other. And so we see from the first four of these commands that God is the one God, the God who calls us to worship and honor him, to find rest in him. So just have a look up there at verse 3. God says, you shall have no other gods before me. So he will not allow us to share his worship with other so-called gods, but he claims there to be the only true gods. And then from verse 4, the second command, it's about not worshipping idols or images. God calls us to worship him alone. And in verse 5 it says that he's a jealous God. Now that might sound a bit strange to call God a jealous God. I mean, that's bad, isn't it? We often think jealousy is a bad thing. But here it's the idea of marriage. God calls people to belong to him in an exclusive way, like in a marriage. So worshipping anything else other than him is like unfaithfulness in a relationship. So, imagine you love someone deeply, you commit yourself to them, but then suddenly, one day you find out they've been unfaithful to you, they've been sleeping with somebody else. And, whoever we are, from whatever culture, we know deep down that's not right. It's a betrayal, and that's how God feels about us. If you look at verse 7, he says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. It's showing us that God, it's not just about swearing, but it's showing us that God is a holy God. He's special. He's to be honoured and respected rather than just cursed or ignored. And then verse 8, the fourth one, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now, I used to think, this is some kind of restrictive law about what you can and cannot do. But actually, that's not the case. You'll notice there it's meant to be a blessing to us. He's a God who calls us to rest, to find our rest in him. It's not a limitation, but actually it's a blessing. And I think, sooner or later we discover that we all need rest. If we ignore that, then, things go wrong. And I think there are at least a couple of societies in time, the Soviet Union, and I think during the French Revolution, they decided to do away with the 7-day week. I think in France they introduced a 10-day week, 1 day of rest in 10 days, and things went disastrously wrong. So we see, actually, verse 10, the Sabbath was intended to remind us that, life is not just about work, but actually it's about knowing the God who made us, having one day when we can actually refocus on him. What about the other 6 commandments? Well, verse 12, honour your father and your mother, shows us what God is like. He's the God of family life, and he longs for us to know the blessing of being in a secure family relationship, a place of love, obedience, a place of blessing. And maybe in our own experience, it's been tough. Maybe our home has been a place of strife and contention, of anger and enmity, and that's very sad, when things are like that, but that's not God's plan. Verse 13, you shall not murder. Again, it's the idea here, God is against murder because he's a God of love. I mean, just imagine for a moment that we lived in a world where murder was allowed, where that was kind of okay, there was no law against it. I mean, that would be a complete nightmare, wouldn't it? Living in that kind of place where you're constantly fearing, a place of violence. And I think if survival of the fittest, if it's just about that, then, ultimately it doesn't really matter if I'm stronger than someone and I beat them up and I take what they have, then that's okay. But thankfully, we do live in a world where God says, no, murder is wrong. I'm a God of love. That's how we should treat each other. Verse 14, do not commit adultery. The Bible is not prudish or embarrassed about sex, but it speaks openly about it as a good gift from God, a delight to be enjoyed. And yet in the Bible, God is very clear that he's designed sex to be enjoyed within the love and commitment and intimacy of marriage. And it's all because God is loyal and faithful. That's why he hates disloyalty. So, cheating on someone when you're committed to them, I mean, that's why God hates that. Now, again, many people think, well, this is just old-fashioned. God is being restrictive, oppressive in this area. But actually, if we take a step back, when we ignore what God says in this area of life, then all kinds of things, all kinds of consequences come from that. Verse 15, do not steal. Again, it's because it shows us that God is not a grabber, but instead he's a giver. He's a generous God. He's a God who's given us everything we have, the life, the breath we have, families, food, friends, everything good we enjoy is because God is a generous giver. Verse 16, you shall not bear false testimony against your neighbour. I guess, sometimes we lie, but actually lying is destructive, isn't it? It really destroys trust. And in a world of lies, we're asking that question, who can you really trust? And God hates lying because he's a truthful God. And it's a wonderful thing that you can trust what God says. He keeps his promises. He won't deceive us. And then the last of the Ten Commandments, the final one there, verse 17. You shall not covet. We don't really talk about coveting, but coveting means to deeply desire something, to lust after something, to want something so much that you're always thinking about it. But actually God's desire for us, his good desire, is that we be contented, thankful people, rather than always wanting more, wanting what we don't have. And again, you think about the advertising industry, it's all based on coveting. Wanting something we don't have. But God created us to be contented, thankful people. So as you take a step back, look at these 10 commandments. I mean, we probably have heard of them. It's not that God is laying down draconian, restrictive laws, but these reflect his loving character. They show us his generosity, his faithfulness, his truthfulness, his desire to give us rest, his desire for us to be contented. I guess some of you might say, well, actually, I don't really think this is very loving. If God were really loving, then surely he would just give us the freedom to discover our own way. And, maybe we can understand that. But let me tell you a little bit about my 4-year-old son, Joshua. He's 4 years old. I love him very much, very lively little kid. But if I just let him have his own way all the time, well, let me tell you what that'd be like. Firstly, he would never eat vegetables. He would always just be eating sweets and cakes and sausages all the time. His teeth would rot very, very quickly. He never wants to brush his teeth. And, he would grow up malnourished and unhealthy. And, that would have a disastrous effect on him later in life. It wouldn't be a loving thing if I just let him go his own way. The other thing about Joshua is if you see him after school, he's constantly trying to pick up sticks. I don't know what it is with 4-year-old boys. They love sticks. So when I tell him, when he's holding the stick, he loves to kind of hold it towards other kids and kind of look aggressively at them. When I tell him, you're not allowed to do that, it's not because I'm just out to spoil his fun. I mean, that's sometimes what he thinks. But, I'm worried that he's going to hurt someone. I'm worried he's going to poke out someone's eye, without really meaning it. And, I don't want him to get into fights and to be hurt. I don't want him to grow up as a violent person. And so, in our family, there are certain rules we have. And it's not because I'm a slave driver. It's not that I want him to be miserable. But it's because I love him. And I want the best for him. I want him to flourish in life. And in just a tiny little way, that's a picture of why God gives these commands to his people. They show us, he wants them to live the best way. He wants them to be blessed. You see, when we follow the Maker's instructions, that's actually how we were designed to live, as Hannah was saying. And if we ignore what he says, then actually it's to our own detriment. So imagine you bought a car. That might be hard to imagine. I know that students often strapped for cash, but imagine you bought a brand new car. And you choose a diesel car, but then one day you decide, well, actually, I've gone off diesel cars. I would prefer to use petrol in my car. I mean, it's cheaper. I like the smell of petrol. Don't know if you like the smell of petrol. Maybe not. But I prefer the smell of petrol. It's so much better. And you think, well, from now on, instead of using diesel, I'm going to switch to petrol. I think that'd be better. And you go to the petrol station and you open the fuel cover and it says they're only diesel. And you think, well, that's fine, but I prefer petrol. And you go ahead, you fill it up, you pray for it, you try and drive off, and we all know what would happen. Within seconds, your car would be spluttering and grinding to a halt because we've ignored the Maker's instructions. And that's what it's like, following God's commands is always going to be better in the long run, because these commands show us what God's like. He's not a cruel dictator, but he's a loving creator God who actually wants the best for us. So that's the first thing. They show us what God's like. Here more briefly, the second thing. The 10 Commandments also show us what we're like. They show us what we're like. Imagine a world without any mirrors. Maybe you're thinking that would be a great world. Maybe you're thinking, oh no, how would I survive? But imagine a world where there were no mirrors at all. Actually, in many ways, mirrors are good things, aren't they? So, you're getting up in the morning, you're heading off to lectures, you glance in the mirror before you go out, and you see that bit of hair sticking up, you try and get it down, it won't go down, you keep trying, and you notice a splodge of jam on your face. I mean, it's helpful to have mirrors, they show us what we're like. But that's exactly what the Ten Commandments, they're like a mirror. As we look at them, we actually, they show us what we're like. And they show us actually what we're really like, rather than just how we like to think of ourselves. They show us how far fall short of God's good design. So just look at verse 3. When I read verse 3, just coming up there. As I read that, I see that actually I've broken God's first command. I've placed other things before God. Maybe it's popularity, maybe pleasure. I have to acknowledge that God has not always been number one in my life, but often it's, most of the time it has been me at the centre. Verses 4 to 6, instead of worshipping God who made me and who loves me, often I've worshipped other things. Maybe for some of us it's academic achievements, maybe it's the glory of my football team, maybe for some of us it's our appearance. And, it shows us that actually often we're living for our own glory and kudos. Let's take just a couple of others. You shall not murder. We're probably thinking, well, that's one I'm okay on. I know that I haven't murdered anyone. But hang on a minute. I mean, Jesus says in the New Testament, he goes to the very heart of that. He says that actually if we've been angry with anyone or called someone an idiot, then in our hearts we've broken this command. So we may not actually have physically killed someone, but how many times have we killed someone with our words? We've used words as a weapon, maybe cutting, angry remarks designed to injure and wounds. Or maybe it's behind people's back, that kind of sniping, gossip, character assassination. You shall not steal. I imagine, probably in this room, there are a number of us who maybe at some point in our lives we've taken something that's not ours. But if we take a step back, maybe it's not been in shoplifting, but what about in our studies? How many of us, I guess, have taken someone's work and passed it off as our own? Or if we've had a summer job, we've the boss has gone out and we've just been dossing around like everyone, checking Facebook and email. I mean, I've been in the workplace, I know exactly what it's like, that temptation. And you can just be doing that, maybe even for hours while getting paid for it. So all of these 10 commandments, they're like a mirror. They show us what we're really like. They show us our failings. And that's maybe a hard thing to accept, but they show us that we're sinful. They show us that actually none of us are the people we're supposed to be. We've all broken God's commands. And so maybe if we have a good opinion of ourselves, we think we're a pretty good person. It's when we hold up the mirror of the 10 commandments to ourselves. Actually, it shows us ourselves in a different light. They show us that we've not loved God and not loved each other in the way that we should have. So that's the second thing, that the 10 commandments show us ourselves. And then finally, the third thing about them is that they point us to Jesus. The 10 commandments point us to Jesus. I think one of the most startling and amazing claims of the Bible is that God is not hidden away up in heaven. He's not unknowable. But in Jesus Christ, he's stepped into this world. And so God now has a face. Jesus himself said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So if we want to know what God is like, then we just need to look at Jesus. I mean, I think that's why it's so great to read a gospel account of his life. I know some of you guys have been doing Uncover. It's a great thing to just take a fresh look at Jesus and see whether he measures up to what Christians say. And as we read these accounts of Jesus' life, the picture of Jesus is just so far from that of a cruel dictator. I mean, he's not at all like a harsh taskmaster. Actually, he's the opposite. He's the one man in history who's lived God's way consistently, who's lived out these 10 commandments we've just been looking at. He lived a life of complete love, not hating people, but instead showing compassion and kindness. Jesus never lied, but he always spoke the truth, even when it was hard for people to hear. He never stole anything, but instead he gave himself. He gave himself on behalf of people. And Jesus always honoured God his Father as an obedient son. So he never lived for popularity, for worldly success, for celebrity status, but he always lived with God as number one in his life. And instead of being a harsh taskmaster who wants to enslave us with rules, actually Jesus died on the cross to set us free. To set us free from the condemnation, the guilt that weighs on us, that we deserve as those who've broken God's commands. And he died that we might know the rest and contentment of a relationship with God, the kind of relationship that Hannah was speaking about. Jesus said these amazing words. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." So as we come to God through Jesus, that we find that actually God is not a harsh dictator, but in fact he's the loving God. He's the God who satisfies us and gives true rest for our souls. Maybe if we're still thinking of God as a hard God, let me ask you, is that what comes through in the lives of the Christians you know? You see, if God were like that, then you would expect Christians to be miserable, dissatisfied, crushed people. But in fact, knowing God is liberating. Knowing your sins are forgiven gives that real peace and rest inwardly. I guess all of us know that feeling. You've had a huge assignment kind of hanging over you. Okay, maybe it's been a really big one. You've been worried about it for a long time. And then you've worked really hard to get it done. It's been stressful. Maybe you've not slept so much. And it's been the kind of thing weighing over you. But when you finally finish it and you hand it in, isn't there that feeling of release? Yes, it's suddenly you're free from it. And in just a very small way, that's a picture of what being a Christian is like. Knowing that our sins have been forgiven is like having a burden lifted off your back. And Jesus promises that kind of rest to those who come to him. I mean, it means admitting we've been in the wrong, that we've failed him. It means looking to Jesus and his death for us. And it means entrusting our lives into his hands. But the wonderful thing is we can trust him. He's not a cruel taskmaster. But as we give our lives into his hands, we find the true rest and life that he promises. As we finish, just one question for you. I know we're going to have questions in a moment, but one question for you. What do you think God is like? Do you agree with the way that the way the Bible presents us with a loving God? And if you do agree that God is like that he's a loving, good God, what is holding you back from coming to him and finding the rest that he offers? Just to say, if you're a Christian, in many ways it's the same thing for us. Sometimes, even as a believer, we can still see God a bit like a slave driver, a demanding God who always wants us to do more. And for us, again, we just need to remember Jesus calls us to find rest in him, that rest that comes from knowing him.